So, Bill Davis, you
Yes.
still have a choice with thermostat, without. My wife is teaching again, which I'm very grateful for. But again, my kit keeps getting pilfered.
Yeah. If it was me, I would have pushed my chair about 6 to 8 inches to the right, stage right of where you are, and maybe not that far. Split the difference, and then push your camera a little bit over, and then yeah. See, even with the picture in there, I think that you're more centered and you don't have anything growing out of your head. That's what I do.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Office
You're
Hours.
off mic, Alex.
I'm off.
Put
I am
put
off
your
mic.
mic back on.
See, I got all excited and I was like on time and I was starting there and I was off mic.
Even
Always
the
something.
great Alex Lindsay can screw it up.
There you go. All right.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are on YouTube and you'd like to join the conversation, you can join. The Zoom link is right down below. We don't really manage the comments in YouTube. If you're here in Zoom and you're wondering how all these fine people ended up in the panel, they got here early. Now we unofficially open at 5. If you look at the emails that we send out, there's a link to where you can register for the kind of the hangout meeting that occurs before that, and then we have kind of a pre-show at 6, and then we 2 hours later we're now in the actual show at 7. You don't have to get here that early. If you want to be a panelist, be here by 6:40, and then we start doing mic checks sometime between 6:40 and 6:43, and once we start doing the mic checks, we're closed for the day. This is what the panel is going to look like. So anyway, so get here before 6:40 to make sure that you can be part of the panel. We'd love to have you. We've somehow collected centuries of experience and knowledge here. I'm shooting for a millennium. Like, I think we added everybody up here. I think we're starting to get close to a millennium of wisdom here that we can answer your questions. But of course, we're depending on you to ask those questions. So if you're an attendee, please ask questions. And the best thing to do is write them down during the day. Like, I don't quite understand why this happened, and then bring them back up in the show. Put them in the questions, and vote those questions up. We need to know which ones are the most important to you. We start every day. The first hour is always general Q&A. That's what we're about to start here. And then the second hour is something more specific. So Mondays are kind of a wild card. Tuesdays are audio. Wednesdays are video. Thursdays are more driven towards artists. Sometimes we bring artists in. Sometimes we just talk about performance. Fridays are more about events, and Saturdays are about education. Today we're going to talk about preamps, like what they actually are and how they affect us. Tomorrow we'll talk about camera sensors. Thursday we're going to talk about basically concerts and how music artists can re-engage their audience. On Friday we're going to talk about Zoom, because there's been a lot of changes and we're trying to keep up with all of them. And then on Saturday, of course, we do a focus on education, where we bring in a lot of educators and discuss online education and training, everything from e-learning to K through 12. So that's it. If you want to share this, you can. What you don't want to do is share your own link. That will just have everyone come in as you. There's only one of you, and there should only be one of you. Use the link that I just put into Makana. That is the best one to actually use there. And Bill, let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
First one we have today comes from Vincent Alvarez of Bellingham, Washington. What's the easiest way to do a simple graphic like a lower third in a Zoom webinar? Free or low cost would be nice. And he has a note on, he's on a PC and he'll be the host. And then he says other graphic will be a secret word for that session. So I'm not sure if that's an upstream, downstream key and he has 2 graphics, or whether the secret word is what he's talking about.
So, I mean, I think that the least expensive way to do that would probably be passing video through OBS. It has its own challenges related to, just sync and stability and, everything else you're using. I believe you're using OBS to NDI to Zoom. Is that correct for the folks that are doing that through PCs? You want to get the NDI tools. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yep. Same basic workflow, but Vmix. And you can see it on the screen at the moment. And I will just fade it out. There we go.
Yep. And so and Vmix costs a little bit of money. OBS doesn't cost any money. But Vmix is going to have a lot more features.
Trial version, Alex.
There you go, trial version for 14 days. So you can give that a shot and see if it works for you.
14?
And Vmix is not that expensive if you're on a PC. It's pretty cost effective way to do that. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say there's another super cheap way of doing this, and it involves if you just need to show a document, you hang a little CD in front of your webcam, You tape it'll shoot the document on your keyboard. Some very brilliant teacher posted this, and then they just tape it to the back of their laptop there. So that's another way of showing a document. I love that. I love the ingenuity. Sorry.
Next question.
So the CD is a mirror for your laptop camera. Very cool. This is A. Mitchells of Washington. What are the best general use plugins and other products from Waves which aren't the WLM, LV1, and so forth?
I got to back up to that just for 1 second. No, that last comment. I just want to underline again, as we think about what we're doing and how we're putting things together in online learning or presentations, and that content is easy. It's easy to make or it's easy to watch, but it's very rarely both. You know, so you know, like you can come up with some you know, crazy. I mean, that looks like something we would have come up with on the farm that I grew up in. But you just have to remember that people actually have to look at it. That's all. Just when you're thinking about the way that you're trying to make it easier for you to present your content, just remember people have to actually watch it. All right, next question.
So that's the A. Mitchell's question. Yeah. What are the best general use plugins and other products from Waves which aren't the WLM or LV1?
Go ahead, Greg.
So forth.
All of them would be my answer. They have so many good plugins and for so many different things. There's tons of compressors, there's tons of EQs, there's tons of all kinds of stuff. So it really depends on what you're trying to do, and I guess that you know, some are more focused to one particular item than another. I'm sure Mickey will elaborate.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, as Greg mentioned, like, you know, generally EQs and compression, dynamics processing in general, you'll need. So, wait. Does anyone know if Waves offers demos for all of their plugins? I know some plugins have demos, but do all of them? So yeah, just take a look at, I guess, read reviews and see their marketing material for especially EQs and compressors. Like, what are they marketing and those specific EQs and compressors for? Is it for music? Is it for speech? And that would give you an idea. But generally, like, for every single audio chain, you'll want EQ and dynamics processing of some sort.
Yep. Go ahead, Bill.
And there's no on sale.
I'd be interested in having Greg, Mickey, and Jeff talk just a tiny bit. So if I was listening to two different compressors, right? So I pull up the LA2A plugin and I pick up some other compression plugin. What might you be listening for to discern the difference between those two compressor sounds? Is there a type of sound or a response or something that you focus in on to try to determine the difference? Because a lot of people I know think a compressor is a compressor. You throw it on and you turn it up or down, and that's it.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, Bill, I think it's a really, really subtle difference, and at that point, I think it's all ears. I don't know that you can measure any kind of quantifiable difference. You're listening for pumping, you're listening for the smoothness of transitions and things like that, one word to another. So yeah.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, when you're compressing, like, say, for example, something like compressors, of course, you can't really compare those more simplistic compressors where there's only one or two parameters that you can adjust. But if you're comparing, like, say, a compressor two compressors that give you control, like real control, attack, release, and so forth. Most of the time, what you're trying to listen out for is coloration. So, like, you have processors that are more transparent, like it's only doing like exactly what's on the tin, like it's doing dynamic range compression. It's bringing down the level once it hits a certain threshold. But there's some processors that add some coloration that you might want or might not want in your mix. So it depends on what you're trying to go for. Like music, a lot of people want some color in music, but you might not necessarily want that in ADR.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, what Mickey was hitting on at the end was pretty much what I was going to say. But a lot of people think of a compressor, you know, it's just something that limits your dynamic range, and that's true. But there's kind of two reasons why you want to do that. One is utilitarian. I just need to take exactly this signal. I want it to sound exactly the same or as close as possible, but cover less dynamic range. Or no, I want to take this signal and I want to make it more punchy or more present, or in other words, I want it to sound different, not just have less dynamic range. I actually want to improve the sound in some way. And that's where it gets very subjective. And that's where, you know, you can have 17 different plugins, set them all to the exact same settings as close as you can get, and they'll all sound a little different. And it just becomes, you know, what is your goal? Are you trying to have the compressor not change the sound other than just make it fit into a smaller dynamics window? Or do you want it to specifically do something cool? And, you know, both things are valid. It just depends on what you're trying to do.
Good, Jeff. And then Greg.
So what Brian was talking about, there's the sort of the just pure dynamics processor that's trying to actually just manipulate the dynamics of the signal directly. And then there's a bunch of plugins that are trying to emulate old analog techniques. And so there were opto compressors that used a light and a light dependent resistor to actually modify the dynamics. There were mu plugins which use a tube element, and there are FET limiters that use an FET, a field effect transistor. Those were all analog techniques. And a lot of these are emulations trying to get the characteristics of those which were not perfect dynamics processors. They all had their own limitations in how fast they could actually manipulate the sound, and also how accurately they could achieve some amount of compression ratio. And we happen to really love the way some of those worked on certain sound sources. And now we also have the ability in digital processing to do things we could never do in analog. So we get things that are very unusual shapes as far as manipulating dynamics. So, you know, it might take certain levels down and then bring it back up, or you get these kind of like reverse dynamic processors that do strange things. So classics ones of those are the 1176 and the LA2A. Those are those FET and optical compressors.
Greg, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just really quick. Jeff pretty much said it. But you know, every mixer has their own preferences as to the kind of compressors that they like. And if you look online, you'll find each guy likes a different thing. You know, so the best thing is get them all.
Play with them, figure it out. Yep, exactly. It's like having like having a toolbox. You just need a bunch of different screwdrivers, a bunch of different hammers, et cetera, et cetera. All right, next question.
Okay, moving on to TJ Asher of Minneapolis here on the panel. With the Pyle sold out and the Polsen sold out, is there another fairly reasonably priced alternative for a simple, good sounding headset mic that the group can agree on? The usage is for a therapist talking to her clients over Zoom.
I mean, I think your next step up the ladder right now is the Samson. I don't know of another. The Samson is more expensive and more noisy, in my opinion, than those two. So it's kind of an odd thing that it costs, 5 times more, and doesn't sound necessarily better. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Nikki.
There are a few out there that are not Polsen or Pyle. I talk about Micronic all the time, which is a UK-based company that you can get in the United States. You just have to go through eBay to do it. But if you do some deep searching on eBay, you'll find some manufacturers of double over-the-ear headsets that work just as well as a Pyle or a Polsen, and give you T4F options or 3.5 millimeter options.
And they are 3.5 millimeter non-Sennheiser options for Micronic. I haven't seen those. That's why I'm asking.
In Micronic, no, that's the 3.5 millimeters for Sony, not Sennheiser.
That's good.
But no, yeah, you can also those can also be interchanged. They have the
as long as you can buy it with
back.
it, as long as it's there. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, that's all on. Like I said, go on eBay.
Good, Mickey.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment I'm sure the Samson, like the cost of manufacturing compared to the Polsen and the The Pyle shouldn't be much different. So, yeah, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
Yep, absolutely. So I guess my chronic is something to definitely take a look at as far as those go as another option. I do recommend staying away from the single ear. We've bought a bunch of single ears. We do get some of those because there are some folks with thick braids that where that becomes more of a challenge. My wife has really thick braids, and so she doesn't particularly like the dual ear. It doesn't really work for her. So there are reasons to have a single mic or a single side, but for the most part, they turn into a real issue with people just not being able to get them to stay on their ear correctly. We end up sending out surgical tape with them just to tape them to the side of their mouth, right, tape them right here just so that they stay where they're supposed to stay. It's usually a big challenge for us. Go ahead. We went through a phase of that when the Pyle sold out, and we exited that phase because of it. Go ahead, Raphael.
How about the DT797 from Biodynamic?
DT797?
Yes.
I can't. I don't see it. Is it now specifically what we're doing here is a relatively cost effective. So think of the cap as being about $100. We'll just say,
okay, that would be out of the budget.
Right. Yeah. So it's like what we figured out how to solve with the Polsen and the Pyles is a mic that's sub $20 that with a small USB converter for a total investment of about $35, you can get something that greatly improves the quality of the audio. It's not as good as some of the higher end mics, but it is definitely a big shift forward for a very little amount of money for folks who just need to have something that works, and so
right.
That's the game on this one. And we're finding it hard because as the word gets out that they're reasonably good mics, everyone keeps buying them. So I don't think they were ready for it. I think we surprised them as a group because again, our group represents a lot of full organizations that are, I've already found out are sending out recommendations like little PDFs of this is what you can do to build your kit. And so it's not just that there's, a couple hundred people here or more in the Discord or more in the mailing list. It's that we all interact with a lot of other people. And so, and these companies were probably selling hundreds before, and now they're selling thousands and they're out. Courtney?
Sorry, I was at the end of my mouse cable. I just checked on Amazon, and this Pyle is still available, which is the one with the TA4 on the end of it. And you can cut that off and put for
those of you can definitely do it for
those of you who know how to solder.
Yep.
There's only 2 wires in there.
Yeah. Yep.
Don't learn on your microphone. Just gonna say that.
Yeah, it's not hard.
Next question.
Moving along, this is Eric Hall from the panel, Mount Vernon, Washington. In Zoom meetings, still struggling to keep up with the web versus local client differences. And Eric, I'm having a little trouble with what all won't work in the browser client these days. Maybe you can amplify that. I'm not quite sure what you mean there.
Well, the biggest thing is you can't see grid and you can't see multi. The biggest things for us anyway is that you can't see the grid and you can't see multi-pinned spotlights. So it really reduces the experience for the user.
You mean the gallery?
Yeah, you can't see the gallery, and you won't see the gallery in the web interface, and you also won't see the any kind of multi-pinned spotlights will not show up in the web area. For a lot of events, I don't do it for this one. I'm always on the edge, but for a lot of events, I turn it off. I think there's a place in there you can turn off the. Like don't let people sign up in the web, like just because it's a much lower experience, and I think a lot of people don't know the difference, so they just do it because it was easy to do. But we definitely recommend against it, and I definitely recommend also setting some. You can now set a limit to how many versions back someone can join an event, and I recommend using that as a tool. Maybe not. We're requiring the most current version, but I recommend using that as a tool to move your audience forward. When they sign up to make sure that they can see all the features that you are using.
Okay.
So,
did I hear you say you recommend against allowing the web client?
I don't fully recommend against it, but I'm on the border of turning it off, and letting people, not because it's not nearly the same experience, and it's really bothersome to not know what people are seeing, in that area. So
That's what I'm
so
talking about.
yeah, I mean, there's some people with a valid need for it because they have security issues. They can't install Zoom onto their work computer or school computer. So that's why we've left it open. But it's not something that we strongly recommend against people using it.
Yeah, I put this link in the chat that shows all the differences, and there's like lots of check boxes. So at the top it says Windows, Linux, Android, Chrome, web client, and then there's just all these differences. So I put the link in the chat so you guys can go scroll through this at your leisure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to make that available, but it's definitely if you join with a web browser, you are a second or third class citizen in the Zoom world. So you just want you don't want people to do it by accident. Next question
comes from A. Mitchells, and he's talking about small lights. I have a teacher, as part of my teacher donations, I bought a few of these, and he links a couple of lights from the DVE store here. Anyone have very inexpensive suggestions on stands for these, small and tall and expandable and fixed? And there's also a kit that includes an unknown remote, and he has a link to that. Any thoughts on this version and what it might do? Still testing new budget gear as teachers find new problems to overcome.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I think those items are those ones that could be used with like a little Joby style tripod. And we have a bunch of those in the store as well. And then that little remote is to start and stop video. So if you're in Filmic Pro and you want to start the video recording, you can use it that way, or it's also a shutter release if you're taking photos. So it's just bundled as a free accessory with that kit. But that's cool. Thanks for donating that to a teacher. That's awesome.
The biggest thing we think about with lights, we bought a lot of lights for a lot of remote kits, is the size of the light. Makes a huge difference. I mean, I think these are better than not having lights, but as you get that light size to be really small, it just tends to look very sourcey. So, think about that as you build those. That's been the problem. I tested the Jobies, and I've tested a lot of these little ones. I'm kind of surprised that more of them don't make like larger diffusers, because they're bright enough, and you just want some kind of attachment that makes them like a 1x1 foot, thing that is maybe not as bright, but a much larger source for that. I'm always surprised that we don't see more of those solutions to increase that surface area. It's super important. Jeffrey, and then Courtney.
I don't know if there's a thread option on that case right there, but you can get those newer extension rods to bring the lights up a little bit so it's not directly into the face. And I think that's going to be a big key right there.
Yeah, one of the things I really like that I haven't leveraged yet is the Nan lights on their compact series have 1/4-20s on all the corners. And I keep on looking at that like I'm going to build a big diffuser. I mean, they're already big, but I have this idea of building these kind of big diffusers that I can just screw into the thing that makes them twice the surface area, because they're already too bright. Most of the Nan lights are too bright for what we're doing with them. So adding a diffuser that adds the surface area to it, we think would be compelling. Courtney, and then Raphael, and then we'll move on.
One other thing to might consider is these the boom arms, like the one my microphone is on and you can't see, are available on eBay and Amazon for around $20, and you get a little thread adapter to go from 3/8 to 1/4 inch, and then you can easily position your lights anywhere you want and attach them to a desk if you're working from a desk, and that way you don't risk people tripping over the stands if it's a hybrid class, which is a thing to consider. If you're using stands and things that are plugged in with wires and stands, can be dangerous in a classroom.
Absolutely. Raphael?
Well, I guess you could like tape a little bit of diffuser film like this around the light.
We've done that. Like, it definitely makes a difference. It just what we're always trying to do, at least with our kits, is remove it, not have it be a science project. So if we say tape, I usually go, oh, it's something I might do, but it's not something I'll send out to somebody to do. I just don't want to say tape. So that's the only thing to think about there. What do you got there, Guy?
Yeah, this is similar to that Nan light that you're talking about. This is the Aperture MC, little tiny light with a magnet on the back. And then this is the diffuser that you're talking about. That's this one's a silicone one.
It is. I have hold on. I think I have. Let's see if I can reach it without uncoiling myself.
I like
Yes.
the silicone because it won't. I mean, you can throw it in a bag and kind of not worry
It's,
about it.
yeah, it's good. I mean,
you
this
could
is
totally
the
beat on this.
this is the Nanlite version of that. They're pretty much the same, I think, as far as structure goes. This is good, but it doesn't really increase the surface area. That's my only complaint, is that what I wanted to do is take this little light. We've used a lot of lights this size for a long time, and take this little light and make it 4 times bigger. And sure, I'll lose some power, but I'd love to have something that I can put it behind that is just going to make it a larger source. And I feel like that's where a lot of these could be augmented. Jason and Bill, real quick, and then we'll move on. We're going to go quickly.
There's always, just a quick thought, there's always just a super, super cheap reflective umbrella. They're incredibly cheap.
Yeah, it's just hard to get these lights to do it well, like, because they're not built for it. Like, that's the problem we end up with, is just things not built for it. Bill?
It's exactly that problem, which is why you see in old soft boxes those collapsible rigs that have wires in them, and sometimes they will have a small light, then one baffle, a translucent panel, and then the front. And the point is to get the light spread out enough to fill that front and make it soft.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Moving on to TJ Worrell out of Minneapolis. What are the panel's recommendations for best practices to control headless Mac Minis? No specific use case at this point, taking advantage of the brain trust where available. I do use TeamViewer on the Windows side.
Go ahead, Stuart.
And I moved my windows around so I could pull something up for everybody to see, which I will just put on in VLC now. So this is my desktop, and you'll see I've got a little program here called VNC Viewer, which we will open up, and that is the IP address of my Mac Mini, which I use for capturing RAW from, yes, I know, 3-letter thing. So this is literally sign in and use my username and ID, and yes, I called it Wally for the sound it makes. So there we are, VNC Viewer. Don't have to install anything on the Mac, and this is running on a PC at the moment.
Jason?
One trick, OWC makes a headless adapter that will engage the graphical portions of the Mac Mini. So if you're not using it as a straight headless server, it's important to just plug that in so that it doesn't deprecate the bus to the graphics.
Yep. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Couple things here. First of all, NDI has an ability to do a KVM switch in it. So if you install the NDI, I don't know if it's going to work on the M1, but what normally I do is I have a little remote control. It looks like a remote control. It's got a keyboard and a mouse on it. You just plug in a USB and you can control from there. And then they're making these awesome flat portable monitors nowadays that are just super thin, and you can put them anywhere. No, they don't have VESA mounts to them, but they have the ability to set up to HDMI, USB, or anything like that.
Eric?
Yeah, the Finder also has screen viewing built right into it.
Yeah, and the way we build them, or the way we're building them right now, is to go a little further, is that we're using a VPN backend, so a piece of hardware. In our case, we're using, it is a Meraki Z3C. The Z3C can take a SIM card, and pop up a cellular connection, so that if we can't navigate the local connection, we can just go to cell. That, by creating that, it creates it, makes it part of our internal network, and then we're using Apple Remote Desktop to control it. And so that, that's kind of all built in. It's not the cheapest solution in the world, but not incredibly expensive, but it's stable. So there's a lot of things that you can do. This one, you just turn it on. There's a little bit of setup, but once you send it out to someone, they just turn it on and it's going to figure out what to do. And you're going to be able to get control of it. And for us, we want to be able to control the cameras and stuff like that. So through an ATEM Mini. So all of that's kind of going into that network. Go ahead, Brian.
This is related enough, but I do the headless multiple Mac Mini thing a lot when I do live shows. And I just use Mac screen sharing to log into them from a laptop. But the little trick I wanted to share is I then use multiple desktops on my laptop, and then take the Mac Minis, put them in full screen on multiple desktops.
So using
and then
spaces.
I just do a 3-finger swipe, and it's like swipe, now I'm running this Mac Mini, swipe, now I'm running this Mac Mini, and back. And then the other little trick is all of my Mac Minis have colors, and I make sure that their desktop picture is that color, so that then when I swipe over to red, the desktop changes to red. I know I'm controlling red, I'm seeing red, and it's a very quick way. I've run 5 different, 4 Mac Minis and a laptop on a live show, running multiple things and swiping back and forth very quickly. It works really well.
And we put, we embed the names of the computers into the desktops, so that we just know when we swing over to it, it just has a name on it. But the color is good too, Stuart. And then we'll move on.
Just a quick one for Jeff there. Was that starting off by using a Mac desktop or from a Windows desktop with the one you control from?
Hello? Wait,
Who
are you
directing the question to?
Sorry, say that again, Stuart?
Jeff, who was just answering a second ago.
Jeffrey or Brian? Sorry? Who are you referring to?
Brian has
Hang
just answered the question, Stuart.
Sorry, yeah, I'm looking at the wrong person on the screen. Brian was just answering.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, that's all from a Mac, and would only work. I mean, would only work reliably on a local area network, but it's mostly just that quick switching way that I found that works really well. So it's one particular use case.
And within a VPN, we found it works pretty reliably over the internet. It's just a matter of, it just works really well when it has. You can do a lot of more complex ways to do it. That's just the most expensive, simplest way. So anyway, next question.
Next question is from Brian Bavito, of Detroit, Michigan. Let's talk Apple and AWS. Has anyone spun up an instance? What is the Vmix killer for Mac? And I'm going to put the link in the chat to the announcement, I think from this morning, that AWS has added Mac servers into their array of services.
I mean, it's brand new. I spun one up early this morning just to play around with it, and it looks like a fairly robust back end. Too early to tell because, they were just announced.
What I will say is that the price per minute, which is over $1, is like $1.24 a minute or something like that. You wouldn't have to use it very long before you could have just owned a Mac. You could have just owned the Mac, the Mac Mini. So, I mean, that's the only thing that I looked at is just know that if you're doing a quick test, if you're trying to do a real quick test and you just need something to pay, you might pay, and it's a minimum purchase of I believe a day. So if you're gonna, if you just want to, you don't want to spend $700, you're trying to make sure something works and you need it for a couple of days, that probably makes sense. But it won't take you very long before you could have just had one at home. Stuart and then Bill.
I'm just wondering if the Vmix killer for the Mac would be Vmix in a Windows PC on AWS.
Very possibly.
Maybe. Yeah, absolutely, Bill.
I'm wondering if that's a little test bed thing like Mac Stadium does, giant server racks full of Apple stuff, so that people in the Apple ecosystem doing software development, things like that, can get access to an array of machines to do stuff, and that this may be the same kind of thing. AWS allowing access to a huge array of Mac Minis with the new chips to give people a test bed.
Well, I think it's just Intel right now, if I'm correct, but maybe not. I thought the first ones are just Intel, and there's a bunch of other services that are less expensive that do the same thing. So you're really deciding, I already have an account and I'm comfortable with AWS, and I'll jump into that. Anyway, next question.
Moving along to Eric Hall of Mount Vernon again. Voice students are still trying to work. Teachers need 2 concurrent camera shots of the student. What's a good, inexpensive kit and workflow for a student in that circumstance?
Now, why do they need 2?
Because they need to have the mask, the frontal of their face, to be able to look at technique and mouth shape and all that. And they also need to have a side view to look at posture and breathing.
Is this spoken voice, Eric? Or music?
Pardon me?
Is it music or is it spoken voice?
Yeah, singing. Yeah.
Okay,
singing.
That helps.
I mean, I think the least expensive way to do that would probably be 2 webcams in OBS and then doing some kind of split screen. You could just take them and create in OBS. You could just put two screens together. You'd create what I would call it from a Black Magic world, a super source. And
remember, students are standing generally because that's the best technique. So you'd also have to figure out a stand for the camera or some kind of tripod.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the so there's a couple things. One is when we need to put what we kind of started with is all kinds of little clamps to get webcams that don't have quarter 20s on them. But the easiest way to do that, in my opinion, if you're going to do a couple of them, is to print a holder that'll go onto a webcam that you have there, and then just hot add a quarter 20 to it. And I mean, again, it seems like a lot of work, but once you get used to 3D printing, it's not. It's a evening of fiddling, and you'll have something that'll hold it fairly effectively. Go ahead, Brian, and then Jason.
I mean, I may be missing something in the question, but to me, the simplest thing for most students will have a laptop and will have a phone. And if both the laptop and the phone both attach to the same Zoom call and you spotlight those two sources, you get a super,
That's a great idea. Great idea.
And, and just only use the audio from one of them, and that's most. And now the stand thing becomes, where do I put the phone? It might get a little kludgy, but if all you have to solve is that, then that feels a little easier.
And a iPhone holder is $4, so that's a pretty straightforward thing. It's good. That's a good one, Brian. Yeah, go Jason, and then Courtney, and Stuart, and then we'll move on.
All right, I'll do the incredibly inexpensive but somewhat creative version. If you have a front-on shot and a skillfully placed mirror right at about here at an angle, you would actually end up with both.
Yeah, that's the magic of mirrors. Thank you, Jason.
That kind of goes back to the CD showing the document viewer, but it definitely, I think that one actually
that was my inspiration.
Yeah, go ahead. Fenwick has left us, but he inspired us to talk about mirrors. All right, Courtney, and then Stuart. And then
I was going to say exactly the same thing, a mirror in the background, but I think Brian's suggestion is probably the best because most people have phones and laptops.
Yep, Stuart?
I would definitely go with Jason's solution as well, but if somebody does want to do the two super sources and you can't get a webcam, IP cameras can be bought that'll do the same sort of thing into OBS. And they're still fairly cheap and still fairly available given the limited nature of webcams.
So like an IP security cam, you mean?
Yep. If I can just quickly swap which source is where. That's an IP camera. And that's an IP camera outside the window of the room that I'm sitting in.
And there's an awful lot on offer this week, Cyber Monday.
Yep. Next question. Good.
Moving along to Ricardo Hicks of Raleigh, North Carolina. When do you decide to put PowerPoint in the window when producing into Zoom versus a screen share?
So the decision process for us is we look at the slides and we look at how good or bad they've been designed. If there's a lot of small text, we have a tendency to go towards screen shares because you won't be able to read the text. If they are properly formed, which means that there's no more than 20 words on any given slide, then you can usually just use you can cut them into the show. They may be a little soft, but they'll be very readable. And then it also depends on if you're in a meeting and have a room join, you have a lot of options because 720p is a pretty good number. But the 640 by 360 we think about a lot, and we preview slides that way to make sure that we know whether they're going to be readable or not. Obviously, people who are well trained or have designers working on them generally build slides that we can use as a cut into a show. Folks that typically are academic, government, science, those are the kind of the ones that tend not to make slides that we can use. So if we get into that type of organization, we usually assume that we're going to have to do a screen share because they're going to just fill the whole slide up with text. So anyway, so that those are the decisions. If they're marketing, usually we don't need to do that because they have a team that makes them look pretty. So I think that a lot of science, academic, and government agencies would do well with more graphic designers. So anyway, I know there's 400 of them in intelligence. Anyway, next question.
Moving along to Jason Robertshaw in Sarasota, Florida. Got an iPhone 12 Pro Max camera frame kit. Came with both a TRS cable and a TRRS output cable. What's the difference, and in what situation would I use each?
The TRRS is both a send and receive, and you can carry a little bit of extra information, through that. You can only go, to my knowledge, you can only go one direction with the TRS. It can go, you need the TRRS for it to be bi-directional. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, exactly. The TRS has an extra line for a microphone input into the device, but without knowing exactly what's at the other end, I don't know what it does.
Yeah, go ahead. Jason, Jeffrey, and Bill, and then we'll move on.
I was tempted to say that's not always the case because, an aux patch or a send return could be TRRS. And if you split it, then, send return for an analog loop would be two-way. But yeah, for the most part, that's right.
Jeffrey, and then Bill.
T stands for tip. SRRs are TS is sleeve. And R, I just blanked on the R.
Is ring.
But
Ring.
the whole ring, that's it. Thank you. So the whole idea is you have three types of cables. You have a TS cable, which is usually an instrument cable, a TRS, which is a stereo cable, and then a TRRS, which is for the phone, for the most likely for microphone, and then the stereo out as well. So,
and the thing to remember is that TRS can also be a balanced cable, or it can be used as a balanced cable, as opposed to just stereo. Stereo is if you use it as stereo, it's unbalanced. Which is not something we want to do more than we have to. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the point of this is that these are just conductors, and it's how the circuit designer and the cable and the equipment interact that determines what it does. The first time I started seeing TRRS cables, they put video and stereo audio, which is why you needed ground versus three other circuits to complete. But that same cable plugged into something that doesn't take video isn't going to do the same thing. So it's what's coming on the other end of the cable, because those video cables used to have a yellow RCA, which was video, and then red and white, which were the two stereo things. So you have to kind of decode what is on those conductors.
Go ahead, Brian.
Really quickly, it's a rant of mine, but 1/8-inch connectors, mini jack connectors, are the least standard connector on the face of the freaking planet. They use them for a bajillion different things. So the second that you are sure you know what it's going to do, there's a good strong possibility that you're wrong. Bill is right. You have to basically figure out what's wired to what, and what am I plugging it into, and what is it actually doing, because they're used for all kinds of stuff.
And to that point, even for the headset or not the earpiece that I use, when we order those, we order them all with TS and TRS together. Like one kit to us is we just do both, because you'll plug them in and they'll work in some places and not work in others, and vice versa. And so it's just easier. It just depends on to get back to what Bill was talking about, how the circuits are designed. Next question.
Moving along to Peter Sargent from here on the panel in Round Rock, Texas. I'm about fed up with my Focusrite Scarlet Solo. It seems
I'm shocked.
Seems very finicky. We've never heard that during mic checks before, have we? What's a reasonable alternative? I don't need portability, and I need at most 2 XLR inputs.
Inputs or outputs, Peter? Is it just inputs?
Just inputs, because I'm going to use. I need it to USB connect to the Mac. So right. I just need something that. I mean, I will set it one day. It will be fine for the show, and then the next, and I use it all day long. I don't touch the damn thing, darn thing. Sorry, and then the next day, Mickey's having me twist it.
Welcome to my world. Like when someone says, "Oh, I've got a Scarlet Solo," we're always like, "Brace for impact," so it's because we just never know what's going to happen. And they have really good higher end tools. Focusrite, we use a lot of Focusrite tools, but the Scarlet line is not our favorite. Raphael, and then Mickey.
I would go for a Motu M4, which has 2 XLR on the front and 2 outputs on the back and 4 inputs.
What is it?
Motu M4. MOTU.
Mark of the Unicorn, for those who are nerdy. You'll never forget that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those actually work with Linux and is used by the Ardour developer.
Mickey?
So yeah, I'm curious how the preamp gate controls on the M4 are. I don't. How are they?
Last I checked, they were pretty good. Very low noise, and actually, it has a much lower noise level than the Scarlet.
No, but I'm asking about how, because the Scarlets towards the end of their gain range, they go really finicky. It's not as granular control. But anyway, what I want to suggest, what I've been getting for people, if they want something that's a step up from the Scarlets, are the SSL2s, and they sound pretty good. They're made in China now, as opposed to the being made in the UK, but they still sound pretty decent.
The heavy iron version is that just works is the USB Pre 2 that made by Sound Devices. It's expensive, and it works all the time, and it is like an M1 tank for audio in and out. It's got limiters on the way in. Relatively good preamps, great out, and it's all dip switches, so there's no control. It just shows up as a device, and you go through there and you can add pads or voltage or whatever, but it's all like little dips that you have. And it was for a long time when we were doing a lot of remotes, it was kind of the bread and butter. Like nothing went out without one. So
if I want to just put it on a shelf in an 18-inch rack, it'll be fine.
Yep. And you'll see, and you have little meters on the front. You can tell what's going on. Again, it's not the least expensive solution to this problem. I'm not known for that, but it is.
I was going to say, Alex, is that the least expensive solution?
Well,
no.
The reason I'm telling you is because I know that you have a Mac Pro back there that is totally loaded. So if you're going to add the Uber version to what you're doing and you just want it to work, the USB Pre 2 is still, in my opinion, for a 2-channel in, 2-channel out. It's still the most rock solid solution that I've ever used. And
Guy, you listening?
Yeah. So anyway, I've had I think at one point I had almost 60 of them. so it was, like they're just everywhere. There's like glue that held together a lot of events. Go ahead, Steven, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, the little PreSonus audio box USB for $100. It works well. We've sent them out in hundreds of kits.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to Doug Ferguson here in the panel from Fort Wayne. Client wants to stream a virtual concert with copyrighted content. Destination is their website. What is the most cost-effective content distribution network?
Do you know how many people are going to watch it? Is Doug here?
Maybe 200-300. Yeah, not that many.
And you're going to do multiple events or a single event?
It's actually a 2-day event. So,
I mean, I don't think that Vimeo really looks at the copyright. And of course you can, get for $1,000 a year or something like that. You can just have streaming. So I think Vimeo would be the first one I'd probably look at to see if it works, or I'd test it. I don't think that it does a copyright testing, within the system. It doesn't protect you from it, but if it's their own content, it's fine. And then the next step from there would be starting to roll your own on AWS or Akamai, which aren't, there's an upfront cost and then there's ongoing. The AWS stuff is, I actually haven't set up my own CDN there, but I know it's doable. We've done it in the company. But those would be the next ones. I don't know of other ones that are kind of white label solutions that are even close to cost effective. The AWS, you just pay. The reason I ask how many people are watching is you're paying by the gig. so you just have to think about your resolution, multiply it to the, you have to look at the gig rates, resolution, and so on and so forth. And we're going to be bringing some more folks in from AWS to talk about how to roll your own CDN in the next couple, within the next month or two. I'm talking to them about scheduling.
If we did do AWS and they wanted to view it later as a,
all those things are possible. You can stream it out to S3, and it's just more work on your end. Vimeo will just do it, right? So that's just a turnkey. It works. When you start wanting to have more control or want to start selling it to clients, then you start thinking about things like AWS and Akamai and solutions like that. But it's more manual work. Like for
right. We just had a bad experience with Vimeo before.
Okay, well there you
with
go.
the same client actually.
What happened?
6 months ago. Well, I did like 2 tests a couple days before, but then actually when we started, there was we hit stream and there was a problem inside Vmix to their system, and then the stream started 6 minutes late, and so I didn't want to use them, but if that's the easiest, I might give them another shot.
Well, and also, the one thing that I will say in general is thinking about how to build a pipeline that 6 minutes late isn't a thing. Like you start streaming to an ingest point. We start streaming to an ingest point generally an hour before. Like if it's not working, we'll know. In that time, it gives us time to do that. So, that's the other thing to think about as far as timing goes, is just to find a way to build a pipeline that allows you to start streaming to your ingest points early. For bigger events that we do 4 hours ahead of time, typically, like it's, and if something goes wrong, I've got a solid 2 or 3 hours to figure out why it's not working. So do think about pushing that horizon of events away from you, in that area, especially if you're using a public CDN, because there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. Anyway, something to think about. It's always been terrifying for us when we do these events that just start right up and they have to work immediately, because we're not even with webinars. I start the webinar 20 minutes before, and let people in so I can, get people through that, get all that stuff working, know that it's working, know that people can see each other and hear each other. We don't usually do events where we let everybody into the room a minute before the event. Usually we open those doors, in a physical event, we open those doors long in advance. And so we want to think about that as we build those events as well. But I think that, overall, if you're really building a streaming business and you want to start providing those, you're going to want to look at things like AWS and Akamai, to solve that and then sell it, sell the service back to your client because there's a lot more you can customize, and you can build backups, and you have control of it, and you can decide when it goes live, and all those things. Next question.
Well, Doug had another one that managed to get voted up the same way. With Blackmagic Design Hyperdecks, can you record at the same time you're using them as a playback device?
Go ahead, Jason.
Nope, absolutely not. At least not.
Well, you can record to them and
there are
playback.
2 of them.
I think you can record to them and playback from them, but you can't do both at the same time. Like
yeah,
you can.
That's right.
Yeah, so just to be clear, you can use it as a playback device. In fact, people do that. But you can't record and playback at the same time. That's an EVS. Or replay from Softron or something like that. Go ahead, Raphael.
Something could be built with a decklink card, I guess, with some software.
Could be. We haven't been very successful at it.
There are scripts that will let you that will let you do really fast replay. Like you've got several of them in a row, and you've got one going 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but it's not easy.
And we're going to go into speed round because we're running low. A reminder for everyone is to vote questions up if you want us to get to them and spend a lot of time on them. When we get to the end of the hour, we start speeding up and answering these questions more quickly. So the votes do matter. All right, go ahead, Bill.
Next question, Tony Adamopoulos in Missouri. Inexpensive HDMI switch recommendations. Source to a TV. The 2 I've bought seem to lose signal.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Monoprice.
Yeah. For the most part, for our HDMI switches, we just find that you spend a little bit of money or you spend a lot of money. The little bit of money, it doesn't cost very much, but doesn't always work. And then once you get over $300 or $400, you can find stuff that is relatively good, but it's expensive. So but Monoprice is probably as good as any of the other ones. Next question.
TJ Asher from the panel here says, is there a type of hybrid event that seems to work well in both in-person and remotely? Sports. There is, not is there. Sports ball endeavors, motorsports, and so forth. I could argue they're better remotely than in person. There is no real interaction between the participants and the audience, and yet people still show up live. Please discuss. And he has note, and dang, this was a hard one to fit into 300 characters.
Yeah, I think the sports work to some, a fair bit as a hybrid event, but you're not having to interact, with the audience. So you're still kind of watching it as a passive viewer. For most of the stuff that we're dealing with events, we're trying to actually have them be part of the conversation, which becomes very hard in that type of environment. And sports are very controlled. You'll notice that you barely ever see the hosts. They're very one-sided. But you're right that it definitely has it is successful in both realms. Although you can argue that it's actually still a show that people show up to. I mean, from the money all comes from TV. And if you've ever been to a sports game, you'll watch a person with a big old orange glove come out in football and sit there, and no one's going to, the game, you don't realize it when you're watching the game on TV, but the game is stopping all the time. And there's long timeouts that you don't see because there's someone out there stopping the game so that the commercials can pay for it. So I would say that most sports are really a TV show where the audience that's in there is more of a part of the show. I mean, from what's paying for it, they might enjoy it, but it is successful in that sense. But it really is still a TV show, And what happens and the timing and everything else is all built around the online audience because they're the ones that's really paying for the show. So I will say that if you are going to do a hybrid, you have to make the remote audience the primary audience. The in-room audience has to be, like in this case, we don't have people in this panel come up with questions that aren't put in the same level as all the attendees. So they have to put the questions in just like you. They get voted up or voted down, just like everybody else's. And we do, part of what reason we do that is to make sure that the online attendees are in the same playing field as the panelists when it comes to driving the conversation. Next question.
Moving on to Eric Hall's second question, or third, from Mount Vernon, Washington. Zoom authorized behaviors are still a mystery when using multiple Zoom accounts during the same browser session. Does the local client's authorization ever take precedence over the browser, or vice versa?
I don't know. I know I'm fairly methodical about it because of I've had so much trouble with authorizations and getting the meetings that I just had this yesterday where someone was having trouble getting their meeting started. And I said, go to the browser, whatever browser you want to use, log into Zoom with the one that you created the meeting with. And in the same browser, in the same line, paste in your Zoom session and you'll get right into it. Don't try to do it through the app. Don't try to, just paste it in. Don't click on it in your iCal. If you're having trouble, you have to do this very specific step and to do that, and it works great when you do that. But you're right that it gets confused if you have a bunch of different accounts. Is where things become. So I've become very methodical about that process to make sure it works. Next question.
It's from TJ Asher, but it is for Victor, and it came in at 4:30 this morning during the pre-show. So I'm not sure if it's still relative. You watched the latest Sax Jam, and it appears you have a new in-ear monitors. What are they, and how do you like them? But Victor isn't here.
Okay, ask that again next time when Victor's here. Go ahead.
And moving to George Seide of St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Does the thumbs down vote for the Scarlet line extend up to include the larger ones like the 18i8? Oh, Sida, I'm sorry. You gave me pronunciation. I missed it. My apologies.
I think the larger, I haven't used that one specifically, but the more expensive Focusrite tools I think are pretty good. I mean, it's not across the line that I don't like Focusrite, but the smaller Scarlet lines drive me a little crazy. And that's mostly just because we're on the far end of musicians having specific trouble with it that we have to DX, and we've lost days on trying to get Scarlets to work. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Mickey.
Yeah, I would probably include that 18i8 in the Scarlet line that have the same issues that you'd run into. And like Mickey was talking about, that they work fine if you're using mics that have a high sensitivity and don't need a lot of gain. But when you get up into the top range of that knob, it's very, very sensitive, and you get big jumps in gain with very small movements. That's hard to work with.
And our biggest problem is that we hear them one day or 1 minute and then not the next. That's, it's like literally just not available is the biggest problem that we get into. Mickey?
I've not had that experience with Scarlet.
We've had so many.
Pretty reliable for me.
And it might be that I think that part of it is that some people don't have problems with a lot of this hardware because you're methodical. Like you just do it a certain way that happens to be the same way that the engineer did it. And then it's not a problem, and it's when you're using it in some way that isn't what it's designed for that it tends to come out of its box. Mickey?
Yeah, I have to say, like in terms of the reliability of the interfaces, the Scarlet interfaces, I haven't had issues either. Same as Jeff. Like we need to keep in mind, like I have like a 6i6 right here. I have an 18i20. But we need to keep in mind this line, the Scarlet line of interfaces from Focusrite are the low end interfaces that they offer. So you can't expect much, especially from preamps, because like for me, if a preamp, like a single channel of preamp goes below like maybe 500 US, then I would consider that like somewhere in the noisier range of things. So like I'm coming through a 6i6 right now, but I'm using a Sound Devices preamp before that. So like don't expect much from it. Is what I would say in terms of the preamps. On the Scarlet line, of course, their higher end line, like their lineage goes back to Neve. So on the higher end Focusrite stuff, then you get good performance from those.
Next question. We're going to go a little heavy, but we're going to go fast.
Yeah, Ricardo Hicks of Raleigh, North Carolina, looking for thoughts on the use of 3D graphics for events. When is it too much?
Go ahead, Stuart.
I'll bite just from the video switching point of view. If your graphics, regardless of their 2D or 3D, cover more than about 20% of the screen, it distracts the viewer from what you're actually trying to present. So you've got to just think about layout, think about where you're putting them and how translucent they are, and whether or not it is preventing the viewer from seeing the content you're presenting.
Now, the interesting thing that we found with some of the stuff that we've worked on for graphics in general is that oftentimes we can actually see an increase in average view time when there's more data on the screen because people have other things to do when it's boring. And that has been less of an issue, but on phones, it doesn't necessarily work. But when you're looking at a large screen TV, wrapping sports or even other events with extra data, you'll see that we do that with Mukana's desktop version, where there's a bunch of comments and questions, a lot of stuff around it. We actually found that when we took that away, we actually ended up with lower use, lower average view times, because what people do is they go back to chatting with each other, they go back and looking at questions, and if you're looking at sports, they're looking at the data, trying to figure out where someone is, and so it actually gives them something else to do. And it's counterintuitive. I have to admit, I didn't come up with it. It was a client that was talking to me about it years ago. And so we started experimenting with it, and we found that they were right. And so I think that that's also partially why you get so much data on things like CNBC and Bloomberg is, that actually has some sticking power to it, depending on what you're doing. Of course, if you're watching something that really wants to be full screen, that doesn't work very well, but it's something to consider. 3D, just make sure it serves the story. That's all. Like if it doesn't serve the story, I'm not sure if it totally makes sense. Go ahead, Bill, and then Kev.
Just amplifying Alex's point, the expectation of the audience is, for me, the biggest deal. If you're watching financial news and you want a ticker and 10 other things and charts and a little content in the corner, if that's your expectation, you'll be happy with that. Somebody else, it'll drive crazy.
Yep. Kev?
That's more or less what I was going to say, Bill. The sports finance where the graphics have a purpose on screen to inform you whether you're listening or not, that's the point of them. But if you've got a 3D graphic that you just like the look of and it's not crucial to the piece, well,
I will say if you're looking for reference, my opinion after watching a lot of this stuff is American football is probably the state of the art when it comes to graphics. Like that is, and they don't always get it right. Like they're using, I think CBS is, I'm pretty sure, using Unreal, and I'm seeing aliasing along their edges on some of their 3D graphics. And so I think they're experimenting with it in certain places. So they don't always hit it right on, but especially like lower thirds and basic infographics, there's just so much money there. Like it's just an incredible amount of money that is being spent to constantly improve that system. The technology behind what the NFL does is probably the highest in the world for any sport. So if you want to use it as reference of what could be done, that's probably one of the best ones as far as oftentimes usually tastefully using graphics. They're pretty good at it. There's a lot of design. They're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars in design, so drafting off of them isn't a bad idea. Bill?
Yeah, I was going to support that. In the NFL, that line of scrimmage, yellow line and first down adds real understanding to people who aren't students of the game in real time. It's brilliant.
Yeah. By the way, that I collect graphics, and I want to go back to us looking through them together. But I use YouTube TV, tv.youtube.com or whatever, where you pay. The only reason I pay for that subscription is to collect everybody's graphics, because I can't watch live TV anymore because I can't watch the ads. It drives me crazy. So but skipping through them and pulling all their graphics out, like, and you just go through one whole show. If you're looking for reference, if you're a teacher or if you're doing graphics and you want to find stuff, the tv.youtube.com is like the key to the operation, because you can just subscribe to everything. I just subscribe to, like, I don't know, over 100 different TV shows. And then at any point in time, I can just go through the library, grab onto a show, pull all the graphics out of it with screen captures because it runs on a browser, and then use them as reference, later to figure stuff out. So it's just a little tip there. Next question.
Moving on to Guy Cochran of the panel from Saddle. Recommendation on Unity Comms headset for iPhones. I need to get 5 and prefer not to have to use the Apple 3.5 millimeter to Lightning tail cable. A little adapter thing.
Are you looking for wired, Guy?
Yeah, it's Unity comms, and the store that they have has all these little ones, and I think Angela was using PT3 or PT2, like these little, there's a 2-wire and there's a single wire, but then it terminates at 3.5 TRRS, and then you got to use that little Apple tail cable, and I just feel like that's a failure point that I don't want to deal with, especially if people are running around in the future, because it'll be a corporate environment that we're using them in for this gig, but in the future, I could see, going out in the field again and wanting something that's not prone to failure.
The ones that we've been the most successful with, and they're not wired, but the ones we've been the most successful with are these little parrots, the Parrot 350s and 450s, I think, they're Bluetooth, but audio quality, ease of use and so on and so forth is pretty high with the phone. Again, not wired, so you need to charge them, but I've never had one. They last all day. This one doesn't, because it's years and years old, and I think I ruined the battery somewhere. But this one, that's why it's sitting here as a prop. But I use this for years for clear comms, Agent IC. So it's it should work just the same.
I saw a post by one of Jeff's friends on LinkedIn, and she had this brand I hadn't heard of, Dollcom. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this stuff, but it looks super fancy, carbon fiber. Like that's the expensive one. They got some other models, and they have these really weird like pinouts. It's like a five pin.
That little one is, yeah. Well, that must be the pinout to them, right?
Yeah. So it looks like it goes into the side.
I think there were some clear comms that used 5-pin.
Yeah, I have seen those before.
Well, there's definitely 5-pin. It's that little 5-pin that's odd. But the other, interesting. Anyway, next question.
Moving on to our last question in this round, and Sky is here. He says he's running a 2019 MacLaptop for all NLEs, all Adobe products, and Zoom, and he wants to know if he should update to Big Sur yet, but he spelled it Big SIR, and I love that. Sounds like a character in a romance novel. I would wait, based on my experience right now with Big Sur. I would wait. I'm just seeing a lot of anomalies right now. I only have one machine with Big Sur on him, and I'm struggling with it. This is my M1, but I don't think it's the M1, because as I talk to other people, they're having the same problems in Intel Macs and so on and so forth. So I think that I'd give Big Sur another point release or two before I jumped on.
Well, I had the automatic update, and all of a sudden I realized, no. Thank you.
Yep. All right. I think we're done with our morning questions. Is that right, Bill? We can switch over.
That is correct. We are finished with the regulars.
Okay, great. Well, let's so does anyone any of our audio experts, we're going to switch over. The idea is to slowly move through the chain and talk about different parts of the audio chain. We talked about mics a couple weeks ago. And so I think that a lot of times we talk about good preamps and bad preamps, and that preamps are really important, but we don't talk about what they actually are. Do any of our resident experts want to explain a little bit about a preamp and what it does, how it manages it? Okay, go ahead, Greg.
I nominate Jeff Francis.
Good call.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Second.
Gain. A preamp does gain, and it may provide phantom power. That's its two big jobs.
Right.
Microphones, hopefully we're using pro microphones so they're balanced, and so that preamp will also need to do the difference between the hot and cold lines of the balanced signal. So a balanced signal uses two wires to actually send the audio, one positive polarity and one inverted polarity from that. And the preamp takes the difference between the two of those, so it's going to try to cancel noise. And so the preamp is doing that job. There's also a third wire, which is the shield, and that is the protection from outside interference. So outside interference should run, and that's connected to ground. On the phantom power side of things, those two wires carry 48 volts DC to the microphone, and the shield returns the current back. So that's the DC circuit. And so you need all three of those wires connected from the microphone to the preamp. But the preamp's main job is just amplification, lots and lots of clean gain. So we're talking anywhere from 20 to 70 decibels of gain.
Right. Because I mean, most mics run at about negative 40. Is that kind of our still
45 to
thumb?
50, I think.
45 to 50. Yeah. Go ahead, Greg, and then Mickey.
Yeah, it's a little over the scale. You have you have kind of low output mics. Most of your ribbons, for instance, dynamic ribbons are low output. The some of the old Sennheisers are low output, and they can require up to 60 dB or even more of gain. Your standard output is roughly 50.
And why are mics so quiet as opposed to line? So line is it's so much is what is the reasoning for mics to be so
it goes back to the physical working principles that we talked about last time in mics, right. Because the amount of voltage that's being generated from either the moving coil magnet thing or the condenser is so small. It's just micro voltage, and that's why we need a preamp to bring that up to somewhere in the line level area.
Right, go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, just to expound on that, majority of hardware like audio processors, analog to digital converters, recorders, they work on line level. They need a strong, robust signal. So you need to get that microphone up to microphone level signal up to a line level signal that these pieces of hardware can work with. Something like an interface, most interfaces now have built-in preamps in them. Most recorders now, pretty much all like field recorders now have built-in preamps in them. So I guess that's somewhere where some people might get confused, like, why do I need a preamp? What they don't realize is that their interface already has a preamp. They just don't they forget that it's there.
Well, yeah, and it's a really delicate process, right? I mean, you're taking a very small voltage and you're making it a much larger voltage. And I think a lot of the reasons I wanted to talk about it is that we just think that, well, it's got an XLR in, they're all the same. And the circuitry and the amount of craftsmanship and processing that goes on in that little thing, that is how it gets into your like that is your primary way that mic gets, the quality of that input affects the entire down chain of everything you're going to do later, which is why I think it's so important to pay attention to. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Courtney.
Just on a pure circuitry and silicon basis, an op amp is the core of a preamp. That's a silicon amplifier. Before you get to the amplifier itself, though, don't forget you've got filtration, which is cutting rid of DC from coming through. So you're only ever amplifying an AC signal that's come from the microphone. And then you'll have bias and offset applied on the circuitry as well. Part of what makes a good op amp is supplying it with a clean voltage supply with no ripple, so that you're only ever amplifying the incoming signal and not the bias voltage that's being applied to actually make the circuit work.
Courtney?
Yes, my formal qualifications are in electronics.
Yeah, it depends a great deal on whether you're talking about the analog world or the digital world. And these days, you always have an analog. There are exception AES digital microphones that are the exception, but most of the time you're starting with a low voltage. And a lot of condenser microphones, of course, have preamps to some degree. They're either an FET or a multi-stage preamp built into the body of the microphone itself, just to get that super low level up to a microphone level that your regular preamp can then deal with. And the other thing to think of, older preamps, not these days, since they all use op amps these days, older preamps which used to use discrete components used to have transformer inputs. And the thing you had to, and some high quality preamps still do, the thing you have to, and the transformer was used to turn that balanced line into an unbalanced line that can be used on the mix bus. And one thing you had to be careful of, if your microphone had a particularly hot output, you could saturate that input transformer, which would create problems down the line. These days, most of the iron is gone from the microphone preamps, and they do a reasonably good job of low noise amplification with the current op amps that are out there. But a lot of higher quality preamp manufacturers actually select each one of their chips and compare them or choose transistors, and they test each one for the signal to noise ratio because some are noisier than others. So they have to use matched pairs of transistors if they're used in pairs, and they try and match the op amps so that the signal to noise ratio matches. And all that happens, and these days too, they're using split preamps to do the 32-bit float so that they have dual A to D converters. So it's divided into the higher level range and then the lower level range, more sensitive range, so that they can spread the dynamics across more bits. And let's see, that's about all I think I have to say. And then, of course, powering is outside of all that. Power is injected right at the point that it enters, that it goes out from the preamp for 48-volt power or T-power with resistors, so that power only goes down the line and then is isolated by blocking capacitors on either side once it powers up your preamp and your microphone. And that's what the DC voltage is for, and phantom power and bias, mic bias.
Mickey, and then Jeff, and then Bill.
I heard Courtney's voice and I forgot what I was going to say. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I just wanted to clarify, we're talking about decibels, and if you talk about 60 decibels of amplification, we're talking about a factor of 1,000. So we're taking microvolts up to millivolts or millivolts up to volts, and that's kind of the only place we ever do that in the audio chain, is to have that amount of amplification, which is why the preamp is so important. I do actually have, so I've got about 70 dB of gain from this microphone to y'all. And right now this is the internal preamp of a Mackie 16-channel mixer. So what one would consider a fairly cheap, terrible preamp, and it is turned all the way up. And then the fader is pushed up to +10, and then it's actually running into my interface in a mic input with 10 dB of gain. And I'm going to mute for a second. I'm going to switch over to another preamp, and you can tell me if you hear a difference. So this is another mic preamp. First of all, I need to know if I'm a similar gain. It looks like I'm a little bit hotter in this one. So this is an Earthworks, which is a discrete preamp. It's got 60 dB of gain in it, and it also has a very different input impedance. So you tell me if there's any difference in what you heard.
Yeah,
there
definitely
better
sounds-
be a difference about.
But definitely sounds clearer. You know, in the what's interesting is I actually hear more background noise because it's actually picking up more, or it's not throwing away as much. So it's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Mickey and then Bill, or sorry, Bill and then Mickey and then Jason. we'll get to questions.
Just in terms of the scale of this, because I know dB is hard to understand. What is 60 dB? What is that? What's the scale of it? I always go back to the first preamps I dealt with were phono preamps, and I would look at a record player back when we had those. And there's a little teeny tiny needle down there, and it's going back and forth in a little teeny vinyl groove, and it's putting out the tiniest thing. And if you put your ear as close as you can, and if you have great teenage hearing, you cannot hear that needle in the grooves. You cannot hear any signal. And if it's a typical teenager, then they put it through their stereo system and you're screaming at them to turn it down. The distance between that tiny sound and that, please, for God's sakes, Jimmy, turn that down, is such a huge range that's what we're talking about, trying to get that little thing up to that big thing.
Go ahead, Jason, and then Mickey.
I'll make it quick. The reason you need 1000x amplification, and I'm not going to get the materials right, but this is, I believe, a neodymium microphone, and it's because the sound waves are hitting a little plate. The little plate is basically inducing current. That little tiny current from my voice is the reason that the preamp needs to standardize in order to mix.
Yep. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, just going to Jeff's test earlier, like what I heard there was smoother low end and a lot smoother high end. It was a lot less harsh. And that's one of the things that a preamp of higher quality could bring. And just like to take a look at the bigger picture of things, like, and please let me know if you don't agree, like the more experienced people in our panel. For me, what matters most in the chain, the audio chain coming in to say like your mixer, what matters most is the first thing in the chain. So of course the sound source, your voice, or the instrument that's being played. If the instrument sounds bad, it's gonna be bad no matter what. Now the next thing that's sorry, this might be rambling on for too long, but the next thing that matters is your room, how that sound interacts in the space. And then after that, the microphone, how that sound is being captured, the sound that's being generated and it interacting with the space is being captured electrically. And then so on. Right after the microphone, like the next step is the preamp. So like the earlier in the chain
and the cable gets to the preamp.
And yeah, of course the cable. The earlier in the chain.
But the only reason I say that, we didn't talk about cables. We didn't make that a whole hour,
true.
but man, you know, like
that would have been a week.
Cheap cables really cut you off at the knees as well. Go ahead, Mickey.
But yeah, like essentially the early in the chain, the bigger difference it would make at the end product. And it's the other way around on the way out of your mixer, later in the chain. So how a speaker interacts with the space, and also one's hearing is most important.
Courtney, and then Greg, and then Jeff.
No, I didn't have anything. Move along.
Okay.
I'm looking.
Greg, and then Jeff.
Okay, I think there's kind of three things that define the quality of a preamp. I think the first thing would be the amount of gain that it's capable of putting out. Typically, 20 to 60 is about normal these days for almost every preamp. Some of the higher gain preamps, like if they go to 70, or like Jeff's example, he's probably got 60. He's cranking another 10 with his fader, so he's getting up to 70. But the preamp itself isn't really allowing that. So I would think you want to look for something that's got a full range. The second thing is the self noise of the preamp. And the third thing is the coloration. Many preamps sound differently. There's a lot of people that want a very transparent sound. There's other people that like the coloration of certain things. A tube preamp sounds completely different from an FET preamp, for instance. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the three things that are kind of the defining issues. Oh, and also the build quality. A lot of the reason that some preamps are much more expensive than others is the price of the components that are inside. You know, the resistors are much more expensive because there's a much lower tolerance. They're very, very tight.
One of the things I think about when I think about things like this, when you're amplifying something 1,000 times where it was before, is thinking about how far off something is. If you're off by 1 degree, 10 feet isn't that much. 10 miles is a lot. You know, like you're off by, thousands of feet. And so the thing is that in that point where you're amplifying something way down the path, the issue you get into is any variations, any small things that are off are amplified as well, and by a lot. And so that's why these preamps become so important. Stuart and then Jeff.
Just because we mentioned cables before, and it's getting good quality signal to a preamp, there's a couple of myths about cables that people need to toss out. Firstly is something from the 90s where we were all told we need oxygen-free copper cables for our speakers. It's so much junk it's not funny. Once you're above a set cross-sectional area on your cable, the material is almost irrelevant. And once you're above certain frequencies, the material is almost irrelevant. High frequencies that we see in video, the signal travels down the skin of the conductor. Now, the low frequencies we see in audio, the cross-sectional area is more important, the quality of the material is very important, but the loose, flexible cables that everybody loves because they're easy to roll up are actually bad for signal because they are created loose by having multi-strands within each conductor instead of a solid conductor. So you want a cable that is harder to wind up for better quality sound getting from the mic to the preamp.
Go ahead, Jeff, and then Raphael, and then Courtney, and then we're actually gonna go to questions.
So, Mickey, thank you so much for that list of things. I would interject there after your source and your room. Before the actual choice of microphone is a microphone placement. Let's not forget that, because if I do that, doesn't matter what mic I'm talking into, doesn't matter what mic I'm talking into if I'm not actually in front of it. Speaking about gain and the accuracy of that, Greg, it gets really important when you're doing stereo or multi-miking. If you're doing a stereo mic technique, the difference between those two microphones, the amplitude difference, is something that will create imaging. So you oftentimes want a preamp where the channels have detents, so you're not just a continuous dial, but you can actually switch between precise amounts of gain, and they are matched from channel to channel to channel, so that as you take a stereo mic setup and you run it into a stereo mic preamp and you turn both of those up, you know that both of those channels are exactly 26 dB of gain. You don't need them to be exactly 26, but at least the left and the right channels are the same gain. Another thing that I don't even know if we want to broach the subject is, do we want to talk about impedances of mic preamps and how they deal with microphones? Condenser mics are generally, because they have a preamp inside of them, the impedance has been taken care of, but dynamics and ribbons are a unique impedance source, and they are very much affected by the impedance destination of the mic preamp.
That's great. And is there something you're looking for in that impedance, or what are you trying to? How does that actually affect the sound?
What we're trying to do is something called bridging mode, which is a low output impedance going into a high input impedance, and we generally want at least a factor of 10. So we want our input impedance to be at least 10 times the output impedance of the microphone. So this microphone is I looked it up, it's like 150 ohms. Now, impedance is the complex version of resistance. So resistance is DC, and when you get into AC, there could be a different amount of resistance at every single frequency, and that's the complex term of impedance. So when you see a number that says this mic is 150 ohms, that actually has not expressed the fact that it might be 150 ohms at 40 hertz, and it might be a different impedance at a different frequency and a different impedance at a different frequency. What we'd like is the mic preamp to be very, very, very much larger than that. So the Mackie, I looked up, the Mackie is somewhere in the 3,000 ohms input impedance. The Earthworks without phantom power turned on is 100,000 ohms. So it's going to not, and what you have to remember is that high impedance acts like it's not plugged in. Air has really high impedance. So the microphone preamp then does not demand current from the microphone because the high impedance prevents current from flowing. And we're not actually we're not getting current. The microphone preamp is going up the cable and is measuring the voltage at the microphone. And now I'm not demanding that this SM7 create a lot of current, like Jason said, with my mouth moving air and moving the diaphragm. I'm not asking the microphone to do work. How do you get work? Power is work. That's voltage times current. Very little current means little work, little power. I'm not asking the mic to do anything. So high impedance of the preamp is a good thing, and it prevents current from happening, and the preamp doesn't demand anything of the microphone. If you get lower impedances, now it's starting to load down the microphone, which is bad for dynamic and ribbon mics.
For some reason, while you were talking about it, I was like, you just have to back up and it's an amazing thing that we can move just a little bit of air and it ends up, all over the world. Like, it's like what we're doing right here, where we're all just moving just a little bit of air and there's people all over the world interacting with it. It's kind of a, we just have to, it's a thing. Anyway, Raphael and then Stuart, and then let's jump to some questions. Let me cut that off for just a second. We're going to jump to some questions. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
First question.
We have 11 in the queue right now. Dan Huber of Erie, Pennsylvania says, to upgrade sound from a faculty in a Zoom when they teach in multiple classrooms, what type of portable USB mic would you recommend?
It's a little more general than the preamp, but let's go ahead and jump on that one. What do you got there, Raphael?
You're muted still.
30. Oh, am I? Hold on. No, I'm not muted.
You just opened.
Oh. This is a SC430 USB microphone from the T-Bone, which is sold by Thomann in Germany. That thing is about 60 euro or something, and it has a really good sound for the price.
Mm-hmm. I'll always lean towards headset mics for faculty. The way I use this one. This one's rocking up a little bit. I keep on taking it off and moving it around, but and mostly so they don't have to think about it. I use it because I don't have to think about it. That I can just sit there and put it on, and I can be talking. And where I don't have to think about my placement, where I'm standing. Now you have to hook it into some kind of wireless system. But again, my sister-in-law is a yoga teacher, and she's using the little Rode Goes and a Samson mic, and she sounds great. So she's doing more than the average teacher needs to do. So I think it's a good stress test. But I would recommend thinking about headset mics for teachers. I think it will massively change what they sound like. You're going to reduce a lot of your room noise, and they don't have to think about where they are. Go ahead, Greg, and then Courtney.
Yeah, I'm gonna second that. The headset with some kind of mini little wireless system. You take the whole thing with you wherever you go. You plug the output of the receiver into the computer, and you're done.
Yep. Courtney.
Well, I would take the other course because I think you're going to run into a problem with these low-budget wireless systems in a classroom situation where you're moving from room to room. If you have multiple teachers all with those wireless microphones, you're going to run into a lot of problems with pollution of 2.4 gigahertz, which is what they mostly run at R5. And so I'd just go for a wired version, some kind of USB interface.
Definitely not. I'm definitely not opposed to wireless versus wired. I just think that for most teachers, even just putting a little belt clip on it with an XLR to it or something else and having them, walk around with it being wired is fine. But I think that it would dramatically change the nature of classes if all the teachers were wearing headsets, even less expensive ones. It's just, there's so much room that we're listening to all the time. When you see people walk away from it, I would still, come back to wireless. I think your point is very valid as far as wired versus wireless. I think you have to figure out frequency coordination and so on and so forth. But I think that it would be still worth it. Mickey and then Stuart.
Yeah, I had the same sentiment as Courtney with regard to the wireless, because most of these 2.4 gigahertz based more affordable wireless systems have a limit of up to 8, just up to 8 channels at a time. So once you're in like a school wherein you have multiple classrooms, you're going to run into issues very quickly. A lot of the adapters that go from, say, Sennheiser 3.5 millimeter with the locking nut on it going to XLR, a lot of those adapters have a nice clip on it. So it should be fairly painless to, you just have an XLR, a female XLR that's just available that the teacher can pull out, plug it in, and you should be
And
good to go.
for a more holistic solution for education, I will say that we've in this environment, the Shure, and this isn't necessarily the cheapest solution, but the Shure Microflexes, if you're going to go, hey, we're really going to do this in a college or in something like that, and we want to manage it, they're kind of magical. They're not the same as a regular one, but they're very easy to manage because you just put them into their chargers and you can resync what mic is what. The receivers go to Dante. So literally there's no wires. Like you just plug these things in. You can mix and match between handheld and desktop mics and little wireless ones. They have the mic itself or the transceiver, you can just pop onto it. And here's the thing about that for educators to think about is that the mic, the transmitter is actually a transceiver, meaning that it has an IFB built into it. So you can have you can plug a little headset mic into it and get an earpiece out of it in one little clip. And because it'll manage up to, I believe, I want to say 38 channels or something in that range. I'm told that the only place that it doesn't work well is Plantronics because they all use the deck format. Then if you're going to use FreeSpeak with them, you got to keep in mind, how many channels you're using up. We've run into that. But outside of that, again, it's a more expensive spend for a school. But if a school wants to have something, this gets back into how much work versus how much money, that if you are a school and you're going to put some money into it, I don't know. I think it probably evens out to about $1,000 a channel, maybe a little less. You end up with something that's easy to manage remotely. You can put it in a lot of different classrooms and have it figured out. You can reconform it very quickly. And it's built for corporate. So it's just built to do this really well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Greg, and then we'll move on.
I'm wondering if secondhand Sennheiser S3s, depending on frequency range, would actually be a decent solution for the same problem. And what people think of the USB mic that I'm using, which is a little $80 JCar one.
If you're seated, absolutely. I'm thinking about instructors that need to walk around a little bit, and again, I think that I didn't really think about the Microflexes. We used to own a bunch of them. And so, but until this question camp, and I realized I'm surprised that more schools, I think most schools don't even know they exist. But as an administrator, thinking about how much time you're going to spend supporting something, it's a little bit of a setup and a little bit of expense. And then it would make a lot of things go well really fast. Greg? Oh, you're muted.
I know in my school we have G4s in all the Sennheiser G4s in all the rooms, but the problem is they're tied into Crestron systems, and for me it's just so insane because there's nothing you can do with those, and so that one of the things about the question is getting into Zoom. Okay, so I mean it's not a serious thing to have a teacher be able to address the class, that's easily accomplished. But then getting that to go into Zoom is another issue, and we haven't been able to make it work all semester.
I think that the thing that I would think about if I was an administrator is having a central location that is got a big old, like either a CL5 or a QL5 or something like that, have all the rooms go via Dante back into it, spend a bunch of time on the pre-build and get it all kind of like set up so that you have all the wireless out there. They all come in, they're all wired using Dante virtual sound cards on little Mac minis that you could virtualize a lot of this, centralize a lot of it, and the teachers are just doing their thing, and you would possibly have one more head that is sitting there. You could literally in that setup have one person that that is not even managing it in person, like literally sitting there looking at the software, and if someone's complaining about their audio, fixing it for them. I mean, we have to start thinking about those kind of centralized solutions, as opposed to every teacher. The teacher should just be like able to put the thing on and it just works. It just ties into it, and we need to stop thinking about it classroom by classroom and think about it as a holistic solution. Jeff?
In the short term, if it's not a holistic solution, make sure that if this is a faculty who is going to carry around their own mic from classroom to classroom, you need to teach them to check the Zoom settings every single time, and they need to know how to do that, because as we see here in mic checks, it doesn't matter if you're bringing in the right mic if you're screaming through the laptop speaker or laptop microphone. And I got to run, folks. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, mute is really important for wireless mics too. That I've taken a bio virtually in front of 1,500 people. So just keep in mind that understanding mute on and off is a useful thing. Anyway, next question.
Moving along to here we go. Blair Thompson of Scarborough. Preamp question. Anyone know of a small field mixer preamp like the Sax SXM2D2, but with 32-bit recording and analog limiters like the Sound Devices Mix Pre 2 series?
Go ahead, Greg and Stuart.
The Sound Devices Mix Pre 2 series.
There's that. Stuart?
I wasn't going to use that particular answer, but in the same vein, and it was Blair Thornton, by the way, Sound Devices makes a very good range of field recorders. They're kind of what everybody graduates up to from Zooms and Tascams to the Sound Devices. Yeah. So that's probably your best bet, but it is an Alex level spend.
It is. And what sets them apart? I mean, there's a lot of little things that set them apart, but one of the things that sets the Sound Devices apart, there's another question about this later, is the preamps. I mean, the preamps are stunningly good. For a portable mixer, they're the best out there, in my opinion. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Greg.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say the exact same thing that Greg said.
Okay, Greg, and then Courtney.
Yeah, the preamps and the limiters, Alex.
Yep.
Are fantastic. It's very difficult to crunch any Sound Devices item.
Yep. There's a reason that almost every movie that we see, when you walk into a movie, I don't, in the US, I know that there's other ones that are successful in other countries, but in the US, I haven't been on a set in a decade that was recording with anything other than Sound Devices equipment.
Right, some Cantars and other stuff, but
I hear about those. I hear about them. They're like Yetis or like Sasquatch. I don't see them. I just hear about them.
Yeah, no, they're really good, and there's still some SQNs floating around out there. But the other thing, if that's not an option, is the Zooms.
Yep.
The F6 does 32-bit, and
it doesn't
the new
have analog
Zoom
limiters,
F2 does.
though.
It doesn't have analog limiters.
No, it does not have analog limiters. You're right about that. Yeah. That's something you have to deal with. But,
Courtney?
Well, you don't have to worry that much about analog limiters if you're recording a 32-bit float. And the Zoom F2, as Greg just mentioned, just came out, and it's a tiny little recorder, about this, it's smaller than the F1. It records 32-bit float, and it's just a mini plug input, so you're kind of limited in your interface to your microphones, and it has no metering or no there's not even an LCD on it. You just turn it on and it records. Hit one button and it records, but it records at it has an average level, but because of the 32-bit float, you can adjust it up or down without affecting your signal to noise ratio. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty cheap, so you might look into that. The F2 just came out.
That's great. Go ahead, Greg, and then Mickey.
Well, just one more thing. I don't know if people realize the value of the 32-bit float. And the one thing is that you can basically record at any level, and you can bring that level to the point where you need it in post. You can overmodulate and bring it back down. You can undermodulate, bring it up with no noise. It's a pretty amazing thing.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Mickey?
Yeah, just comment on like how of the different brands of recorders that we see in on sets. Like in terms of narrative, I tend to see more of like the Divas, the Diva 24s, the Zaxcom recorders more than sound devices for narratives. But for ENG type stuff, definitely sound devices. Yeah.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to Jason Wise of Orlando, Florida, excuse me. Aside from the cost, the Behringer X32C compact versus the Midas M32R, from the outside they appear very similar. Are there different internal processing advantages of one over the other? And what about apps for each? Is one app development system, I guess, more robust than the other?
Go ahead, Brian.
No. The M32R and the M32 series and the X32 series are internally identical, with the only difference being that the microphone preamps are of a different design, and you can debate back and forth as to whether it's a better design or they sound significantly better, or whether it's worth the extra money, and that's a value decision. But the internal components for the sound processing, once you get into the digital domain, are identical. The apps are identical. Literally, the only difference in the code between an M32 app and an X32 app is the very first line that identifies whether it's attached to an M32 or an X32, and everything else is exactly the same. I think I will say this, I think the M32R's physical footprint is the best one in the entire X32 M32 line, because it has actual scribble strips, it is rack width, and the controls have a little bit better feel than the X32. But yeah, it's the Midas and Behringer both have done a very good job of marketing to create differentiation between those two lines, but in reality, they're basically the same thing.
I will say that when Midas was bought, I feel like is when Behringer took the corner. You know, like they became a different company when they got, like, whatever happened. It was literally, you know, they just went by whatever they did when they bought Midas. It just completely transformed that company from junk to, you know, very usable, you know, equipment that we use a lot. It was a fascinating turn. Next question.
So this one was in pretty early. I think we might have covered it. Well, just what is a preamp anyway? What does it do? That was kind of the first whole part of this.
Yeah, we covered that. Go ahead, next question.
Okay, James Babbitt of San Diego. Is it difficult to make a good preamp? It seems that good preamps are somewhat rare.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I only because I wanted to throw this in earlier, and there was so much good information that I bowed out. But it used to be extremely difficult to make a preamp that was even very good, much less excellent.
Mm-hmm.
It is no longer difficult to make a preamp that is very good.
Mm-hmm.
And most commercially available preamps are very good. That is to say, they are completely usable. You can get a reasonable amount of noise floor. You can turn them up and sound comes out and it sounds pretty good. That used to be really hard to do and was really expensive. And if you didn't spend the money, you had a bad time. The differences that we talk about now are really the differences between very good and excellent, or very good and achieving a specific result that we want that requires us to spend the extra money. And I only want to throw this in just because I do think that because 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, it was still quite difficult to put a reasonably good preamp in anything that was relatively inexpensive. There's still a huge emphasis on, you know, what the preamps, and the question we just that I just answered, the difference between the M32 and the X32. It's a different preamp design. Honestly, it's very tiny difference. It's you know, it used to be that it's like, oh, one goes and the other one doesn't. Now it's just, oh, that one sounds a little bit different, maybe better. And so I do think that it's a good thing to kind of just put some of this in perspective and go, yes, requires pretty good technology, but technology has gotten extremely advanced, and now you can basically buy a preamp on a chip for $1, and it's not bad. Like, it's really, really very good.
Next question.
Moving on to James Babbitt, and James has a couple. Oh, I guess that was the first one. Here's the second one. In choosing a preamp, what seems the most important? Gain, noise, coloration, price, or something else?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Is it the single time in every show that someone has to say it depends? It depends on what it depends on what you need. Like say if you need preamps for, say, to make a drum kit, you don't need that much gain for a drum kit. But say if you need a preamp for, a very intimate voiceover, say for example you're doing ASMR, then maybe gain might be of more importance. So it truly depends on what you're using it for.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I totally agree. For instance, like if you're doing Foley, for instance, and you're trying to record some really, really soft sounds, then actually all three of those come into play. Not so much the coloration, but you might find something that you want. But certainly the noise level and the amount of gain available.
Yep.
Because you need to be able to get up into those higher areas without a lot of problems. And oddly enough, the best preamp I ever heard was the stock preamps in one of my Studer consoles. And this was from the 80s. And it was just clean as clean could be. It was beautiful.
Interesting. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, in terms of just to talk about like preamps that we love, I still don't own one, but Greg, I'm still looking for a Martech MSS10 for Foley. It's one of the quietest preamps I've ever used.
Next question.
Sorry, my mouse was in the wrong place. Paul Wallace, audio. Debatably, the 4 best preamp mixers on the market are the Behringer Xenix 502 preamp mixer, the Mackie 402 VLZ 4-channel preamp mixer, the Yamaha MG10 preamp mixer, and the Roland Octacapture USB 2.0 audio interface preamp mixer. Which is the best?
Go ahead, Greg.
They all are. I'm using the Maddox theory.
They're all really good. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, to go back to what I said before, all of those fit absolutely in the very good department. And there are a lot of preamps that fit into the very good. Those are all very good. In fact, most of them, unless you buy a complete piece of garbage from Indonesia that costs $3 shipped, most things have very good preamps. Those are all very good. It is debatable as to whether they are the best preamp on the market, which is part of what we're talking about now.
Right. Next question.
Moving on to the next question, which comes from James Babbitt. And James Babbitt says, please comment on the preamp quality of the Sound Devices MixPre 6.
Well, to follow up on that, this is probably some of the best. I don't know if it's the best, but noise floor is like below, under 100, minus over 100 dB. It's quite a thing. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, can we just replay what Brian said like a minute ago?
Yeah, but it's I would say that those are very good, and I would list in exceptional, exceptional preamps in the MixPre line. Next question.
Moving on to Michael J. from New York City. Using the SM7B on a Mac with a 6i6, are there software preamp alternatives? Would Audio Hijack be one?
They're all happening after that. The preamp is like, it's the gatekeeper. It's the audio is coming in, it's being amplified, and then it's being handed off to everything else in your software chain. So the damage has already been done, or it's already been set up correctly. It's either set up correctly or not, and you can try to, fix it, but the preamp is going to set the pace for everything else. Go ahead, Raphael.
Well, whatever you're doing, if your sound is not good from the time it gets into the computer, there's no fixing in post. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Greg, and then Brian.
Yeah, definitely like garbage in, garbage out. But if you do need more gain, assuming your preamp has a decent signal to noise ratio, you can add more gain digitally. But it's not the ideal solution for things.
Go ahead, Greg, and then Brian.
Okay, and as we saw with Jeff Francis when he was here, the 7 is a very low gain mic, so you're gonna need the 70 dB, right, to get it through. So you need to make sure that whatever preamps you're looking at is gonna give you that. And if you're just looking at an audio interface, you have to look at the quality of the preamps in there. For instance, I have this Apogee Duet, which I love. It's got tons of gain, and it sounds pretty good, I think.
Yep, Brian, and then we're gonna move on because we're gonna go into speed round. I actually have a 9 o'clock, so I have to be
and as do I. I'll make this really quick. But the SM7B is a great example because it's a relatively low gain microphone, which means that if you put an amplifier at the end of the XLR cable, the very, very low output microphone is transmitting that very, very low amount of signal down the entire wire. And then you're jacking up the gain at the end, which means every bit of noise that you picked up along the wire goes right up along with everything else, which is why the recommended solution for an SM7B is to use a cloud lifter, which is just a little 20 dB gain box that you put at the microphone side, and it gives you a little bit of extra 20 dB just to get you down the wire. It's just ultimately this comes down to the principle of the earlier in the chain you can put the high quality gain, the better off you are. The farther down the chain you put it, you're just everything that was garbage up to there, you're just making it more garbage.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
James Babbitt, San Diego. Audio, please comment about the Neve preamplifiers, and has anyone worked with a Focusrite ISA-1?
Go ahead, Mickey.
I haven't used the Neve preamps yet, but I used to own a pair of ISA ones. Decent, transparent, relatively transparent sounding preamps.
Next question.
And Keenan Campbell has our last question. Well, there are a couple more coming in late here. What is the panel's opinion on the Ultimate Ears UE5 CSX? They are offering them with Bluetooth and hardwire, trying to stay away from AirPods Pro for Zoom meetings.
I don't think any of us have tried them yet. We got stumped. All right, next question.
Okay, moving over the last couple here. First, James Babbitt, San Diego. Audio, please comment on the somewhat noisy preamps in the mirrorless cameras.
It's not their area of strength. Anyway, Stuart, and then Mickey.
Yeah, you literally just covered it. That thing has horrid microphone level preamps because it's designed to work line. Same with DSLRs and mirrorless. One note that I'd like to just sidetrack on for further reading for people, look up Class A, Class B, Class C amplifiers. All preamps should be Class A amplifiers.
Go Mickey.
Yeah, preamps on mirrorless cameras or SLRs in general. Scratch track, guide track.
Yeah, they're great. We pipe it into it all the time so that we have a reference track for us to pull stuff together. We do not use them for the actual audio. That's crazy. Next question.
And the last one today, James Babbitt. What preamps would be easier to use for non-tech minded users?
Buy a USB mic instead. If it's
if you're gonna,
non-tech.
I mean, there's a lot of good ones there that'll work well. All right, so we have made it. We've got 3 minutes left, just in time for us to open the post show, the post meeting for anybody who wants to go over there and keep talking. You don't have to. We're trying to see. People had requested this, and we're trying to see whether it has legs. So I'm going to close this up. Go ahead and say goodbye to everybody, and then open the meeting and see if people want to keep talking about preamps or whatever else they want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up real quick. I have to, if you're going to do it quickly, because if there's I have